What's going on, dice makers and prospective dice makers? Today we're going to go over how I make my molds. Now this is a three-part system that you will need an FDM printer for. The first part here is the actual mold box or case itself, whichever you like to call it. Then we have the key. This is what's going to allow us to get definitions, and this is the door. All of these names are non-patented or copyrighted. Using this system, what we're going to do is make a linear slab mold with all 7 pieces. The first step that you want to do is going to be to coat everything in Vaseline. Now this video is done at 400% speed, so this looks a lot faster than it actually is. You want to coat the entire thing in Vaseline or a mold release so that it makes it getting easier when your mold is set and your silicone's cured and you're ready to actually start making dice. Next thing we're going to do is wrap the key in Gorilla Glue packaging tape. I use Gorilla Glue just because I haven't had any cure inhibition issues, and you want to make sure that you have the sticky side outward. Then we're just going to trim off all of this excess here using the key itself as a guide. I have not found a way to make this completely clean, so if yours isn't completely clean, don't worry about it. Now once this actually goes into the mold form or the mold box, you're going to want to make sure that the key portion, which is here on the left side of the screen, is towards the solid wall of the box, and that the completely straight portion is towards the door. Now we flip it over, we do the same thing on the other side. Please excuse how messy my mat was. I thought I cleaned it down before starting this video, but I guess it wasn't quite good enough. So we're going to go through here, we're going to get rid of all this excess tape. Once we're done with the excess tape, we're going to take a look at putting the proto dice or the masters on here. When this goes into the box, make sure you have that tape joint down. So here we're looking at doing the actual assembly, and as you can see, I line it up with the flat side to my left. I'm actually going to switch that here in a minute and have the key on the right. And again, with the Gorilla Glue tape, make sure everything's nice and clean. Make sure you have the key to the back and the flat towards the door. Quick little trim here. And once we get all this done, we're actually going to give it a quick wipe down with IPA alcohol solution, just to make sure there's no fingerprints or any excessive dirt, nastiness, or debris on the key itself. Then we're going to actually take our proto dice or dice masters. Hashtag proto dice is what we're calling dice masters from now on. And we're going to start gently arranging them. So you do want to have a decent amount of spacing between these in order to provide enough structure in your actual mold walls. So what I do first is just kind of lay them out, get a look at them, and then I will go through and adjust them just to make sure they're as evenly spaced as I can get them. Once we get them as evenly spaced as possible, we're going to press them down nice and firm. Then we will use a slight bit of alcohol in order to get off any fingerprints. I don't like doing this with gloves because the gloves stick. At this point, if you're using mold release, go ahead and spray it now before you drop it in the box. Then we're just going to use the door to push everything down and make sure it's firm. Next, we're going to mix up some silicone, but nobody wants to see that, so we're going to go straight to the pour. We're going to pour it in. Try not to pour directly on top of the die. You want this to flow and kind of envelop them like a nice hug. Let your silicone hug the dice, don't just dump it on. After your cure time, whether in your pressure pot or not, we're going to go ahead and pull out our mold base, and then we're going to cut out the key. You're going to have a lot of silicone get under this, you're going to have a lot of silicone enwrap this. You're going to need to just go in there, cut it out. Be very careful in this step because I have actually cut the silicone keys off, and you can still use it, it'll still work, but it's not going to hold your lid in place as well as it should. So we're going to go through here, we're just going to cut everything off of here using the key as a guide, and then we'll pop the key right off. Once you pop the key off the top of this, make sure you check your dice faces and make sure that you've pulled up any of the Gorilla tape or the packaging tape. Sometimes the tape will just stay on the mold like it did here. I'm going to go ahead and pull that up. Not an issue. Then you want to go through and clean up all this silicone flashing. Again, being careful not to actually cut the keys off, but get all of this cleaned up, get it nice and presentable, especially anything that may be around the faces themselves. You want to just take your time with this, do it gently, do it carefully. I've cut chunks out of my mold doing this before, so just take your time with it. Once you get all of that cut off, we're actually going to be going back into the mold box. So you also kind of want to squeeze the dice in there to make sure that there's no air bubbles underneath that may rise up into the top of your mold, but it should be just fine. Then we're going to cut off this excess flashing where the door was. Once we get that done, then we are going to put Vaseline over the top of the mold here. When you're doing the Vaseline, you want to be very, very careful not to get any on the dice. And if you do, use another Q-tip or use a paper towel to get it as clean as possible. Maybe use a little IPA in order to wipe it down. But you want to make sure that you get Vaseline on all of the keys, all of the mating surfaces. This is just going to make it to where you don't accidentally rip out a chunk of the mold later. This is going to act as your mold release, the same as it did in the mold form itself. You can also use a spray mold release here, but that may dull your dice faces. And right here I got a little bit on the D6, so I'm just taking a little bit of IPA, wiping it off, getting it nice and shiny. Same thing for the D10s, but you want to make sure that you have a nice thin layer. You don't need to lay this stuff on super thick, and the thicker you lay it on, the more separation you're going to have between your lid and your mold base. So just make sure you get it on there, smooth it all the way around, get it nice and clean, get it on your keys. And once we have everything situated, it's back into the mold form. And again, make sure you line up the key to the solid wall, and where the empty space was on the key is towards the door. Push it down with the door, slide the door in, and now we're going to pour the top part of the mold. So for this, same thing as before. You don't want to pour it directly onto the die, but you just want to let it flow out and over. If you do pour directly on, it's usually not a big thing if you're using a pressure pot, but if you don't have a pressure pot, you definitely want to allow the silicone to flow where it needs to be. So once we get all of this excess silicone out of here, we're going to put it back in the pressure pot for another day. I am using a pressure pot for my molds. I also degas my silicone to make sure I get out as many bubbles as possible. But this will go back into the pressure pot, and once that's done, we're going to demold it and take a look at it. So now we're coming up on the next day. We have a nice beautiful mold in a box. So take out the door, take out the mold, and again we're going to go ahead and cut off this excess flashing here. And now we are very carefully going to start prying it. Now you will have some silicone that kind of oozes down into the side. Just kind of use your thumb to roll that up and cause it to release from itself, and then very gently take it apart. Then we're going to go through here and we're going to trim off this excess flashing here, and we're going to go throughout the rest and clear out the keys, make sure that everything's nice and clean, as straight as we can get it. And then you will have the top portion of your 7-piece slab mold. Now in order to get the proto dice out is the same as you're going to get your actual dice out. You're just going to flex it back a little bit and roll it right out. Nice and easy, nice and smooth. That one kind of got away from me. But the nice thing about this particular mold is you can get that bend. I am using Dragon Skin 30 silicone for this. It's the only one I use. I really like it. It's a great silicone, but most of your silicones should be able to do this. And then once you get everything out, you have a nice, beautiful new mold to use. Super simple, super easy. Takes a couple days, but there you go. Enjoy.